Right, afternoon, Jeremy. So, are you ready for this then?
I'm ready, yes.
Right, okay, so we're limited to 10 minutes.
Right.
When did you qualify, and who was the principal of your college when you went through?
I qualified from the European School of Osteopathy in 1987, and the principal at that time was Tom Dummer.
Right, so Marjorie Bloomfield came later, did she?
Oh, actually, no. Marjorie Bloomfield became the principal later.
Right. Okay.
I think Tom was the academic principal, and Marjorie was, executive principal.
So 1987. That means you've been qualified 30-something
years.
3 years, and you've been teaching with the SCC for 20-something years, haven't you?
Yeah, I think probably nearly 30 years, because after I qualified. Oh, hang on. So I qualified in 87, and then I did 2 courses with the which was cranial courses, and then I was invited to teach with what would we call the Southern Cranial?
Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah.
So I've been with the SCC since the beginning.
Yeah. Anyway, my first question to you is, who, can be more than one person, do you think has had the greatest influence on your osteopathy and your development?
Well, I've thought about this since you asked the question on email, and I think there's several people. I think firstly there was Tom, the principal, Tom Dummer, and what attracted me about him was his very minimal treatment model, and that's something that's provided a thread through my osteopathy about doing as little as possible to achieve as much as possible. So that's something that I brought with me into the involuntary mechanism work. And even though he didn't do any cranial work, he had this quality of working in a floating dynamic field that was a privilege to watch. And he often said to me that he wished that he would have known about cranial when he trained in the 1950s, because it's something that he would have loved to have done.
So that needed an incredible focus, didn't it, for him to be able to really see through to the salient issue affecting that person, that patient, so that he could be minimalist in what he was doing.
Exactly right. But from the whole moment, from the moment he put his hands on the patient to the differential diagnosis, or obviously the moment they walked in the door, it was all part of a dance, a dynamic, which brought you to the point where all he had to do was one little thing to tip the body into its new balance. Did
he ever trick you? Did he ever trick you?
Yeah, he did.
What was your recollection of that? What did it feel like?
Well, I think it was very specific, very gentle, and yet it enabled a lot to happen.
Did he have to follow you up?
I never had a course of treatment, just the only occasional thing from him.
And who else then do you consider has been influential in your development?
Well, I think it was more in terms of writings. The writings of Rollin Becker, and I only met Rollin once. The writings of Andrew Taylor Still, which I was introduced to at college, and then Sutherland himself. And I've always, I knew right from the start that it was the involuntary mechanism work that I wanted to do. It's always was what drew me into studying at the ESO in the first place.
Fantastic. So how do you feel you've changed throughout your practice life?
Well, I think there's other influences I'd like to kind of talk about as well, because there's my friends and colleagues, and there's so often something that somebody says that triggers off a train of thought. And it's often those little kind of bits of something somebody says around the edges that makes you think, makes you develop, and all of that has fed into my learning and my exploration of osteopathy. So then...
Carry on.
So then I was going to say probably the last one I wanted to talk about as a strong influence was probably Jim Jealous. where I did the biodynamics with him, and I enjoyed his sense of creating signposts for your palpatory experience, which, that vocabulary wasn't available to us in other ways. So that was very useful. But he also, again, around the edges, he gave me permission almost to let go of that model, let go of the models, to move on to other things, to see what was beyond them. And again, he said something about a trip that he did with Joe Grasso, and I forget who else, and they went up to the north, into northern Alaska to try to get to a place where nature was pure. No one had been before. So he was looking for that purity in the natural world, and the willingness to go and look for that is something that I got.
So does that translate up into your gliding when you're up and away?
I'm trying. I realize that you have to do the groundwork to get the mastery. So there's a lot of process. So I feel I'm moving on that course in my osteopathy, and I've got further to go in my flying. When I observe the air, I'm not necessarily picking the best pathways to travel all the time.
That's a very good analogy. So if you had a crystal ball, Jeremy, what direction do you see yourself going on in the future?
From an osteopathic point of view?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a continual journey. It's this journey, and there's like a Buddhist thought that I have a Buddhist story about a man in trying to cross this busy river, this very fast-flowing river, and there's no bridge, there's no ferry, so he has to build a raft to cross it. And then he paddles across the river, and then he's got to make a decision. Does he hang on to this raft and carry it with him, or does he let it go? And obviously it makes sense at that point to let it go. So I think my learning is something of picking up a model, learning to understand it, developing it, and then letting it go to move beyond it. And you can always find new models if you need them. You can always find useful things on your journeys that you can move on with. But I feel that the only stable point in the therapeutic dynamic that I'm working towards is that there's a patient and a practitioner and the natural world, and it's the relationship between them. Everything else is in a state of flux and motion.
I think that's a great view and a great way to look at our development, to be completely open to directions and influences, not be fixed in where you want to go, but just that willingness to keep exploring and keep listening.
Yes. Yeah. And that's an ongoing. I find I'm coming back to reading more still these days. We've talked about earwax, and trying to understand more about the philosophy, more about what he's trying to communicate. And, at the moment it's pertinent, really looking at the lungs, both as their nutritional effect, providing air, blood, oxygen interchange, oxygen carbon dioxide interchange, but also their role in excretion as well. That's so important, and trying to understand that at a more refined level. So it's every day, with a new patient, it's a new journey.
Given that we'd like to be seeing patients at the moment. Yes. Or are you?
Well, I saw 3 this morning. So I'm seeing a few emergency patients. And I put one of them, I put on a little bit on the website, on the Facebook page, she had the COVID with the pneumonia. And I've been exploring that. It's been very interesting to appreciate that what we have to look at is that relationship of the alveoli, the relationship oxygenation of the lungs, the air-blood interchange, and how that has been affected. It surprised me that the potency of that in terms of what this virus has done to people. So it's a different level of having to treat people rather than treat with bronchitis or pneumonia or whatever.
Again, part of our learning journey, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're with the models that we've been exploring through the rule of the artery, we're well equipped to do that.
And the SCCO Module 3 also.
Module 3, yeah.
That all feeds into that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So, we're teaching on those, and yet we continue to learn and develop and explore out of that. So that's one of the great joys of teaching.
And that's part of our endless fascination with osteopathy. There's always that ability. There's always something to learn and always something that keeps us going forward, isn't it?
Yes. And it's that journey is a sort of spiral, isn't it? You're on this journey, but of course what it does, it brings you back to where you started from, to that kind of beginner's mind and that willingness to be open to the joy and the satisfaction of what we do.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Jeremy. That's been great. Thank you for starting the chain reaction interviews off. And I think this will turn out very well.
Oh, that was good fun. Thank you.